My name is Justin, and this is Cinephile Studios. In late 2017, Sony Pictures released one of their biggest films in recent memory, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. It was a project that was initially announced as a remake, which later became a sequel/reboot. It was a fun movie. It had good humor, it had a great premise, it had enjoyable performances. It was one of the better family movies of 2017, and it managed to surprise me. It continued the legacy of the original Jumanji film, which in itself was a great family adventure movie, and it brought new ideas to the table, and yeah, it could lead to a lot of possibilities in future installments. Now, as I praised the movie for being the awesome popcorn flick that it is, I can't help but think of another Sony Pictures film that was only released a year earlier, Ghostbusters, the 2016 version. It might seem a bit weird to be comparing the two, seeing that neither of them come from the same franchise and both have completely different stories. But every time I think of Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, I can't help but think of the 2016 incident that surrounded the Ghostbusters film. I think it affected Sony Pictures in a major way, and it immediately led into the events that became Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. Both films were released by the same company, both were based on nostalgic IPs that hadn't had a new installment in nearly 20 years, and both were very expensive.
Now, I know Ghostbusters is still one of those touchy topics where the offenders and even the defenders get really loud and proud. I don't really want to talk much about the film itself because I thought it was an okay, basic summer blockbuster, but pretty forgettable. It had its fans and they can love it, but what I think is important is examining the mistakes that were made with that film that ended up directly affecting the future of other blockbusters, including Sony's own Jumanji film. At the time when Ghostbusters was nearing its release, a Jumanji remake was already in the developing stages. Just as a Ghostbusters reboot had drawn negative criticism, so did this Jumanji announcement. There was an argument that the film was at least changing up the premise from a board game to a video game, but people were irked about the idea of a total remake just after Robin Williams had passed away. It felt dirty, just as the Ghostbusters reboot was coming right after Harold Ramis's death. Now, I know there are other reasons people hated Ghostbusters. There was sexism, but also many fans of the original simply didn't want a reboot, as reboots in general had fallen to the wayside, like Total Recall or RoboCop. The idea of doing a reboot was no longer profitable as it once was. So after Ghostbusters was released and didn't manage to get its budget back, several changes happened that helped Jumanji avoid the same circumstance. Here's my take on what happened. Number 1, removing the term remake. Ghostbusters' biggest complaint was that it was not a continuation of the original franchise, but rather a complete restart. People didn't take kindly to it, especially since Ghostbusters 3 had sat in development hell for years. Ghostbusters was a popular franchise in its day. While it had dwindled down, I think with the right budget and director, they could have made a huge smash with a third film. But a reboot was not out of the question. Films like The Force Awakens and Jurassic World had proven that the idea of a soft reboot is an effective way to pay tribute to the classics while making something that could lead into more potential films and merchandise. It's a win for the fans and it's a win for the studios. Ghostbusters maybe came too late since it was only released a couple months after Jurassic World and The Force Awakens. The film was already in full production, so they couldn't respond to those successes. So instead of being a continuation, it did its own thing and it turned viewers off. Now, back to Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. It used to be considered a remake, but right around the time Ghostbusters became a flop, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson came out and said the film would be, in fact, a continuation of the events from the original and pay tribute to Robin Williams' character, Alan Parrish, making fans rejoice. It was no longer a remake, but a sequel. Now, how did the film do it? Well, besides Alan Parrish's name being in the treehouse, there's really no connection to the original, but that's all audiences needed. I think that this little change made all the difference. Number 2, marketing. Remember when that Ghostbusters trailer came out that referenced the 1984 film? And how everyone got confused since it was not a sequel to the original? Well, it was marketing like that that managed to turn off moviegoers. Jumanji instead made trailers that completely focused on the new plot itself and a fun soundtrack. Ghostbusters didn't really have any funny jokes in the trailer itself, but honestly, after watching the film, I could see why it'd be hard to create a trailer with what's given, since none of the jokes would really make sense without context. However, Ghostbusters was going into overdrive with marketing. They had tons of TV spots, internet publicity, a video game. It was literally everywhere, so it's no wonder why it was such a gamble. They were literally spending tons of money promoting the film to an audience who wouldn't see it. Jumanji, on the other hand, kept their marketing low. They relied heavily on social media and their stars, and in turn, it created a profit. It's unfortunate because Jumanji also had a bigger cast of stars, whereas Ghostbusters only had a couple minor stars and SNL cast members. Maybe this isn't a huge point, but spending too much in marketing will cause your movie to crash. However, the biggest factor is number 3, the time of the year. There's a big misconception in Hollywood that the best time of year to release your movie is the summer. However, other films need to be strategic. Series like Star Wars or Marvel can get away with releasing their movies any time of the year because people will go no matter what. But something like the Lego movie won't have an automatic crowd, so you need to find the perfect month where they won't be surrounded by competition, like in February. Studios are strategic in this way, and they'll compete against other films depending on the genre. If an erotic film like 50 Shades is coming out Valentine's Day, it's assumed that the single women will go to that film. So what do you do for the other crowd? Release an action film, of course, something like Kingsman: The Secret Service for the single men. It can be an effective process depending on how generalizing you can be with your demographics and if your movie is even good. Summer has become such a bloated season that movies that can potentially make more money simply get pushed out by other films, and movies that have controversy, no matter what kind, will be affected by a busy month. Solo could have made more money in an empty month like February or October, but because of its controversy and busy May release schedule, it didn't manage to do as well as the other Star Wars films. Now, Ghostbusters technically had weak competition, but that can also cause problems. The film's controversy bogged it down already, but with films like the BFG and Independence Day Resurgence only coming out weeks earlier, I think the 2016 season was tainted. It was not a big summer to go to movies, and Ghostbusters didn't have much of a demographic to begin with. It didn't get the nostalgia crowd since it was a reboot, it lost groups of men because of dumb reasons like sexism, it didn't appeal to children since it was a live-action comedy that didn't involve Marvel or DC, and it didn't appeal to older people since it was seen as just another action effects movie. So finding the perfect time to release it was never going to work, unless you became a second option to a bigger film. Now, if people go to the movies for one film, chances are they're gonna go for a number of other films as well. Case in point, when The Force Awakens came out, the fourth Alvin and the Chipmunks film was released on the same day. And guess what? While The Force Awakens made nearly $2 billion, Alvin and the Chipmunks also did good business, because it was a second option for families to go to in the theater. When the summer season is dead, your film may die as a consequence. But when something like The Last Jedi came out, which was expected to be a big seller, Sony released Jumanji in the style of the fourth Chipmunks film, hoping that families would turn to it as a different option. And it paid off, not only for Jumanji, but for The Greatest Showman as well. When a movie is that huge, something like Star Wars, it's gonna sell out, and people are gonna go and see something else because they're already at the theater.
So is there any hope for Ghostbusters? Well, I think you gotta wait a couple years to make a new film. Let this one wash out of people's mouths, let enough time to pass so they can forget about it, and then in a couple years, make a new film, except make it a continuation of the original films. I think you could even include the 2016 movie in some way. I mean, we do so many things in blockbusters now with alternate realities. I think there's a way that people could accept all of the cast members and put them all together in one big film. Jumanji ended up fixing their film in a really small and kind of dumb way. They just simply added Alan Parrish's name and boom, there you go, it's a sequel. It was dumb, but it was effective. It was little tiny details like that that made that film way more successful. When it comes to millions of dollars, you need to make a good film, which I think both cases they did make good films, but you also need to know how to market it, you need to know where to place it in your schedule, and you definitely need to know how you're going to tackle this project. Ghostbusters made a couple of mistakes, and maybe it just had a bad hand from the beginning. Maybe there was just no way it was going to be successful with the way they went about it. But I think Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle proves that Sony is willing to learn from those mistakes, and hey, maybe someday we'll see a Ghostbusters continuation in some form. I'd like to see it. I think a lot of people do. But that's just a tale to be seen for the future. In the meantime, since Jumanji was so big, I'm gonna guess that we're gonna get 30-some sequels, a TV series, and I don't know, some kind of homemade food item that you can buy at the grocery store or something. I don't know. Jumanji snacks. Who knows? This is Justin. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching the video. A special thanks to Ryan for supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to join him and get early access to certain videos and have your name stamped on the end of videos and even request reviews monthly, then please click on the Patreon link, and thanks for the support.